Is your humble narrator and host, JT Wheatley, once again bringing you another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, the 1980s. One of the significant things at the beginnings of the 1980s was the rise of the teen superhero, with Legion of Superheroes number 259 in January of 1980, and the new Teen Titans of November of that same year, which featured the new lineup of Changeling, Raven, Starfire, Kid Flash, Robin, and Wonder Girl. The rise of the comic book store was also a great innovation in the medium as well, as it not only gave fans a centralized place to go to over the news and magazine stands, but since these stores were needed to develop shelf space, it led to a more independent comic books becoming available. Marvel and DC got in on this as well, with Marvel offering the Dazzler exclusively to comic book stores on March 1981. Next to the big two, though, you had independents like Pacific Comics and its Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers in November of 1981, which provided royalties to creators and thus attracted the likes of Steve Ditko and Neil Adams. Comico was another publisher with Primer number 2 in 1982, which featured the first appearance of Matt Wagner's anti-hero, Grendel, while in Warrior, on March of 1982, Alan Moore and Gary Lack revived the classic British superhero Marvel Man, which would later be reprinted in the U.S. as Miracle Man in 1983. Also, this comic carried Alan Moore's V for Vendetta with the artist David Lloyd. On September of 1982, Wolverine got his own miniseries by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller. In addition, in response to the creators' demands, Marvel launched Epic, a line that allowed creators to make a mature content along with maintaining ownership. One notable example was Dreadstar in November of 1982 by Jim Starlin. Starlin also created the Death of Captain America trade in 1982, which was go on to sell over 100,000 copies. Marvel continued its licensing tradition with G.I. Joe on June of 1982 based on the popular toy and cartoon line. They smartly hired Larry Hama to write it, who himself was a military veteran and wrote the character sheets for each G.I. Joe figure. Essentially, he is the creator of the modern G.I. Joe, and his run is considered superior to even the cartoon series. Over at DC, the Maxi series, i.e. a miniseries at 12 issues or more, was created with the Camelot 3000 by Brian Boland and Mike Bair. By 1983, there were more comic book publishers than there had been in 40 years, with such publishers as Whitman, Archie, Charlton, Eagle, Red Circle, Kitchen Sink, Comico, First, Capital, and American Comics, also known as Eclipse. The teen craze in comics continued at Marvel, with New Mutants on March of 1983, while over at DC, Batman number 358 on August of 1983 introduced a new Robin, Jason Todd. American Flag debuted in October of 1983 by Howard Chaykin, and The Spirit continued as well. However, the biggest debut in the indie publishers format was from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Mirage in 1984 by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. Originally conceived as a satire of Daredevil, this comic quickly became more popular than many of its mainstream counterparts, and is still considered the most successful comic book of all time. Over at DC, the Ronin series by Frank Miller began on July 1983, showing his maturing art and storytelling ability. Then, on May of 1984, Marvel launched Secret Wars by Jim Shooter and Mike Zeck. The first company crossover event of its kind, it stretched across the entire Marvel universe and most significantly introduced Spider-Man's black symbiotic suit in issue number 8. It was so popular that Spider-Man getting yet another series in April of 1985 that featured him in it called The Web of Spider-Man. The event itself was so successful that it quickly was followed by Secret Wars 2 to lesser success. However, for better or worse, the standard was set and company-wide crossovers soon became a regular event. Also at Marvel, The Punisher got his own miniseries on June 1986 by Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck, and the X-Men got another book with X-Factor on February of 1986 that featured the original X-Men reunited. All of this is part of what is considered to be the greatest years in comics ever, 1986. Though it should be noted it kind of bleeds over from 1985 and into 1987. Nevertheless, here is a list of the comics that came out during this time. The Dark Knight Returns on March of 1986. Crisis of Infinite Earths, which began in April of 1985 with the intention of revamping DC's entire line. Man of Steel in June of 1986, in which John Byrne was tasked to revamp Superman after the Crisis. The Watchmen in September of 1986. Daredevil Born Again in the issues of 227 to 231 on February of 1986 by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow in Action Comics number 583 and Superman number 423 by Alan Moore and George Perez on September of 1986. Mouse, A Survivor's Tales by Art Spiegelman in 1986. Batman Year One and Batman number 404 and 407 by Frank Miller and David Michelinie also in 1987. As you can see, this is a pretty good list of some of the best comic books ever made, and quite frankly, a few of these are in my top 5, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a better period of quality in comic books. At Dark Horse, the comic Dark Horse Presents, on July of 1986, introduced Concrete by Paul Chadwick, while Marvel sold the Return to War comics with the Nom on December of 1986. Back at DC, the Crisis revamp continued with Wonder Woman Volume 2 on February of 1987, and most notably Justice League on April of 1987 by Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Kevin Maguire. What's interesting is that while they were tasked with revamping DC's premier superhero team, they were told they couldn't use Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, or Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. As a result, the team consists of Batman, Guy Gardner, Green Lantern, Blue Beetle, Mr. Miracle, Shazam, and the Martian Manhunter. Thankfully, their combination of talent and humor made this one of the most memorable runs of Justice League of all time. Meanwhile, manga, the Japanese form of comic books, started to make their appearance in America with Lone Wolf and Cub on May of 1987, which featured a new cover by Frank Miller, who was a giant fan of the series. It would quickly be followed by Akira under Marvel's Epic line in September of 1988. In addition, Marvel finally had Peter Parker marry Mary Jane Watson in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 21 on 1987, while The Punisher got a regular series on July of 1987. 1998 was the 50th anniversary of the first appearance of Superman, and CBS aired a special on him, along with Time magazine putting him on the cover, the first for a comic book character. As for Marvel, Incredible Hulk number 340 came out in February of 1988 by Peter David and Todd McFarlane, which became a major success for McFarlane, with his classic cover of the Hulk being reflected in Wolverine's claws. This led to McFarlane going to Amazing Spider-Man, and on June 1988, in issue number 298, it featured the first appearance, albeit a cameo, of Venom, which he co-created with David Michelinie. At DC, Alan Moore and Brian Boland delivered the definitive Joker story with Batman the Killing Joke. And then, in Batman number 426 to 429, the Death in the Family storyline occurred. In a surprising move, DC decided to test the popularity of Jason Todd, Robin, by letting fans vote whether he should live or die in the story. Apparently, he wasn't that popular, and the Joker ended up killing him, with Tim Drake eventually taking up the Robin mantle in issue number 457. But the biggest news for Batman was the movie directed by Tim Burton and starring Michael Keaton, which was released in June of 1989. A visually stunning film that followed the darker path that comic books had taken for the character, it was a modest critical success and a huge financial one, leading to a new franchise of Warner Brothers and revived interest in the character. Finally, to round up the 1980s, Marvel celebrated its 50th anniversary in November of 1989, while The Sandman was published by DC on January 1989. Overall, the 1980s proved to be a banner decade for comic books creativity and would continue on to the early 90s. However, there is danger when you fly too close to the sun, and soon the medium will feature a crash that will nearly destroy it.
My name is Mark McCray, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
And now it is May 16th, 2024, time for the favorite comic of the week. Ultimate X-Men number 3 by Peach Momoko, which features the origin of Maystorm, the new friend that Armor has made friends with. They're trying to get the larger mystery about where their powers are coming from and also who's the mysterious villain behind them. And also, we finally get someone finally said the word mutants out loud, so we're getting some real world building in this issue. This is a great series, one of the most unique understands, especially from a mainstream comic with X-Men on it, because it plays more like a Japanese horror title than a straight-up comic book, and it's just a lot of fun. Momoko's art is second to none. You love its depictions of a teenage high schooler's life is perfection. Great characters all around. It's like great seeing these other characters used up. And it's really an example like why I love Ultimate Spider-Man. It's easily the great mainstream success of the new Ultimate launch. For many reasons, of course, the obvious, Peter and MJ together. You gotta love this is the most unique comic book and really pushes the envelope. Peach Momoko continues to show that this is one of the best artists in the comic book stands right now. So definitely pick this up. And of course, since we're on the subject of X-Men, of course, the X-Men 97's series finale was yesterday, and they stuck the landing perfectly. This is the perfect revival of the classic X-Men animated series from the 1990s. Fantastic work all around, voice acting, an adaptation of the script. And the best way to describe it is that X-Men 97 is as good as you remember the original animated show, because you go back and watch, still great, a lot of fun on Disney+, but it has aged a little bit. This show pushes the envelope. It's very much a PG-13 show. Great, and it really gets you hanging. That cliffhanger, oh man, so many great stories are coming. They're going to be adapted, and this is every time someone says that Marvel Studios is on the downslide, then something like this pops up and reminds you, oh no, they're at top of their game. So yes, great week to be an X-Men fan, because we got Ultimate X-Men number 3 and X-Men 97 season finale. The only downside is we're not going to get another X-Men 97 for a little while now, but we got 2 more seasons coming eventually. But yeah, so great. And with that, we will conclude for this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for another episode of The Archive Editions. Until then, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And if you can, definitely check out Ultimate X-Men by Peach Momoko. She is just a fantastic artist all around.